Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Heal with Kat podcast. My name is Kat. I am your host, and I am so excited to be back for my second week on my video podcast game. If you joined me last week for last week's episode, which was all about embracing our generational gifts, I talked about how eclipse season is really holding up a mirror to my life and asking me to level up. And I also today had an incredible conversation with the great Krista Ripma of Authentic Audience, who is going to help me make all my dreams come true in my business. But this is one of the ways that I'm supposed to lean in, and I'm leaning in, and I'm actually getting a huge kick out of it. It's actually really fun. And tonight you are getting Kat After Dark. It's like 8 o'clock at night. Just got back from yoga. I've been kind of building this podcast episode out all day, and it's a podcast episode topic that I'm actually really getting the courage to even talk about, because I think a lot of times with what I experience in sessions with clients in FCT or family constellation therapy, if you're new here, it's a lot of really confronting experiences that people have had, or confronting feelings or emotions that people are having. And we get into the nitty gritty in sessions, and there's a lot of magic in that. But sometimes the people that aren't in sessions miss out on that really incredible information or like educational aspects of FCT that can be really supportive for people. So this week I'm really leaning in connection between weight and abuse. And I'm not even going to start with a personal update because there's really nothing to update. We're just going to get right into this week's episode. And I would like to share with you a trigger warning that if the topic of weight or abuse or eating disorders, and I'm talking abuse of emotional, physical, or even sexual kind, if that is a triggering topic for you, this week won't be the episode for you to listen to. Or if you haven't listened to last week's episode, it was great. It was all about generational gifts and embracing the gifts that we get from our families, and it was a lot lighter. So welcome back, or welcome if you're new. We're just going to start today's episode off with a really big somatic exhale to kind of prepare ourselves for this conversation and all the things that are going to be shared today. So with that, take a big exhale out of the mouth. And then inhale in through the nose, fill all the way up through the belly and the breath. And I want you to hold your breath at the top, and then exhale through the mouth, sigh it out, let it out, make a little noise, maybe stick out the tongue, and just reconnect to your body, reconnect to the present moment. When we're in a regulated state in our bodies, we find that our field of consciousness, our ability or our capacity to hold information widens. When we are triggered or in a dysregulated state, our consciousness tends to really become hypervigilant and focused on a fear, a situation, a feeling. So we're going to use our breath today to really ground into our bodies and to center ourselves in this information. If you find yourself becoming triggered at any moment, you can simply stop listening, or you can pause, come back to your breath. You can reach out for support. Whatever you need to do to really get yourself into a parasympathetic state where you feel open and ready to receive. Some of the things today may land, some of them may not. Some of the things you may have to go into your life and think more about. But with that, today we're going to talk about something that's a little bit more niche and could, like I said, potentially be a trigger warning for some, as we're going to talk about the unexpected connection between struggling to lose weight and abuse. And I've decided to become more actively vocal in talking about how ancestral trauma can show up for you in these very detailed ways, because like the title says, they are very unexpected. And then once someone explains it to you and the connection between them, it's like a light bulb goes off and it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even see that. Well, that's what family constellation therapy does. We help you see the unseen, not only intuitively, but in the field on the papers. And I see clients regularly who come to me with weight issues. It's that and romantic relationships are probably, and I'll say money. Those are the top three things that I see. And whether it's somebody who has struggled with feeling healthy and strong and confident in their bodies their whole life, or whether this struggle with weight happened after having a baby or having surgery, or kind of these random moments that pop up in the journey of our lives. There are many different stages of life where we can struggle with our weight. And so I want to normalize that, because weight is such a reflection of our internal experience. And I want to preface this episode by making it super duper clear that not all weight issues have to do with abuse at all. But in the realm of family constellation therapy, looking at these possible connections connections between emotional, sexual, or physical abuse and weight issues can be like a key indicator that a pattern of trauma is keeping someone stuck or blocked. So if you are someone who has experienced abuse in any form, especially sexual, and you struggle with your weight, this episode could be really supportive for you. When I share this information, it's not a generalization. It's just key indicators that we look for that could possibly hit home for you. So yeah, starting off with that. I also want to share something really interesting before we dive into a lot of the stories and FCT related information today. My boyfriend last week sent me a really great article because I was kind of talking to him about how I wanted to start opening up more on podcast episodes about maybe some more like triggering topics, but that are really educational, informational for people to really see how FCT can support them and the fundamental beliefs behind it. And he found this article from PubMed, and the title of the article says Obesity Risk for Female Victims of Childhood Sexual Abuse, a Perspective Study. So this study, I'll link it in the show notes. It's actually really short. It's like maybe 3 paragraphs or 4 paragraphs, but this study looks at how being mistreated as a child, like through sexual abuse, might make girls more likely to become overweight or even struggle with obesity later on. And the reason I'm bringing up a PubMed article and scientific data is because FCT does a lot of explanation for some people, but for some people, they need concrete data. And I am holding space for both of those things to be true. I think that people who struggle with like the Western healthcare system, like may question, PubMed articles and may trust a healer more, but hey, we're holding space for it all. So in this article, in this study, researchers followed girls from childhood to young adulthood to see how their body sizes changed over time. And they found that while there wasn't much difference in weight during childhood and the teenage years, it's when they became adults that they were more likely to experience obesity or being overweight. The study suggests that feeling sad or having changes in your environment or your hormones from being mistreated, specifically sexually, might play a role in all of this. So understanding this connection could help people who have been mistreated get healthier and also find hope that they don't have to be stuck with this trauma and abuse in their body. And it's also really important for scientists to keep studying it because, and I'm going to circle back to my thought earlier, it provides society, who I think, and this is again a generalization, but I think society lacks faith in the wisdom of the body and the energy that we hold sometimes. And that's not really a judgment. It's just you don't know what you don't know, or that you align with certain beliefs differently. But with the data that this article provides, it kind of gives validity to somatic therapists, the energy workers, and the healers that we're not crazy, and that maybe, again, this is probably an overgeneralization, but I deal with a lot of skeptics in my personal life around this work for how spiritual I am in certain ways. My community is not always super spiritual, and a lot of the stuff that I talk about with friends and family, it's out there. So when my boyfriend sent me this article, I was like, okay, see, like I'm not crazy. There's like science to back this up. Also, I don't know, I'm kind of a little geek about science in some ways too. But yeah, luckily people like Peter Levine and, let me see if I say this guy's name, Bessel van der Kolk. Yep, said that right. They've really legitimized the connection of all of these things, but we still need to educate people on this. I feel that so many people walk around in life carrying the weight that is not theirs. And actually, I'm going to rephrase that because I don't think weight belongs to anyone in specific. I don't even think the weight belongs to the abusers, but maybe a more accurate statement would be that the weight people are carrying around every day is the body's way of protecting itself when it's not in an environment that's threatening or abusive anymore. So it's like reliving the trauma by creating a barrier or protective shield around the body. And a while back, I did an Instagram post on a client who had come to me for specifically a weight concern. I only saw her once, but the session was super powerful and she's allowed me to share this. She said that no matter what she did, the weight would not come off, especially since having her son 6 years ago. And in our intake, when somebody brings something like weight issues to me, of course, I'm conscious of asking certain questions that could then lead to, did this happen? Did that happen? What was your childhood experience? But I tread lightly because like I said earlier, it's not always the same for everyone. And I'll talk about other circumstances in which people hold on to weight. So it's not just like abuse, and that's towards the end of the episode. But yeah, in our intake, she expressed that she had been abused physically as a kid and she was spanked growing up. And her father had also been physically abused as a child, and so had her mother. So their parents were essentially just repeating what they knew for discipline and reprimanding the children. And that was kind of just like quote unquote parenting in their eyes. So again, I kind of had like a sneaking suspicion that the weight the client was holding on to was due in part to the physical abuse, but I knew I wasn't seeing the whole picture. And it's really hard to just generalize and understand things in the first hour of the session. That's why my sessions are 2 hours, because we need one whole hour for like the psychotherapy, talking things through, which a lot of people get a ton from just that. And then we get on the papers and then we actually see what is keeping the client stuck around this specific concern. And then we process like what's going on after that, and it ties everything through. So of course we use the consciousness field in the papers to show us what was really going on. And it was fascinating because as soon as she stepped on her inner child paper, and this actually also happened on her future self paper, she experienced a deep amount of grief and sadness and heartache. She just kept rubbing her chest and just the tears were flowing. And it was almost as if she had just unlocked a piece of grief she hadn't touched on before. And as a reminder, when you stand on these pieces of paper in this energy field, you are literally embodying and channeling what's on this paper. So she was not only channeling her inner child, but she was also channeling her future self. And even though that paper is full of positive things, there's still grief in that experience that she can't move into that person that she wants to be because the grief is too heavy. So in that FCT, we addressed how her parents looked down on crying and expressing emotions. And so she said, I feel like I always had to hold it together. So there was the missing piece, or the missing part of the pattern that we were looking for specifically for her, that she was holding in her body. We spoke about it all when she got off the papers, and we both kind of agreed that we felt the weight issues stemmed from the unprocessed grief that was being carried from childhood, from the physical abuse, the pressure to be thinner and different than who she was, and the lack of emotional freedom to express herself. So she was holding all of that suppression and that grief in her body. It's common that people will hold on to that weight to protect themselves from their abuser. It creates like a physical barrier between them and the abuser. And so we're going to kind of get into that more specifically at the kind of middle to end of the episode. But I actually have a personal experience with this as well. I was not physically abused as a child or sexually abused as a child, but I experienced some of this kind of holding on and carrying weight from an abuser in a relationship that I was in. And this is really vulnerable for me to share. When I was married to my ex-husband, I was in a very dark place with my body. Part of the emotional abuse that I experienced from that relationship was partly his unrealistic expectations of me and what my body needed to look like or who I needed to be, and the deeply hurtful comments that he made about my body. And for those who don't know, from about 10 years old to about 24, I suffered from an eating disorder on and off. I would kind of dabble in and out of it whenever things were stressful and there were difficult things going on in my life. And what started as body dysmorphia turned into a very small stint with bulimia. And then I realized I literally hated that so much. So I resorted to binging and restricting. And I started to use food to become the emotional processing crutch to lean on, because in truth, I wasn't getting a ton of support in or outside of the home. And also no one in my family had a healthy relationship with food. Kind of the beliefs in my family system around body image were very skewed. And so a lot of my beliefs around my body were normalized, like the unhealthy ones, were normalized by, I think, even friends and family, because I even had friends who struggled with their body image, as most kids, might around the age of 10 years old, with like puberty and almost becoming a teenager and boyfriends and girlfriends and all these hormones coming online. And so a lot of my beliefs, like I said, were normalized normalized by both family and friends. And no one ever stopped the pattern that was unfolding for me and said, hey, like, you're beautiful in your body. Like, you don't need to change yourself. Like, all these feelings that you're having are normal. So from the time that I was even remotely aware of the relationship that I had with my body, it was already unhealthy. Like, I never even got a chance or like an inkling of hope to like believe I was lovable or beautiful or worthy. So fast forward to being in my 20s, I was in this really emotionally toxic and emotionally abusive relationship where I kind of placed all my value and my worth onto my partner to fulfill purpose for me because I had no confidence in myself. So I was kind of leaning on him to tell me if I was pretty enough or if I was skinny enough or if I was good enough, because I was searching for that validation from my childhood and in a partner. And I had no confidence whatsoever. I just was like, whatever you say, I'll do. These are really emotional parts of my past for me to talk about because I've grown so much from those times that I actually feel a little disassociated from those times because I was not present and I was very much surviving. And I was totally in my head, out of my body, surviving. How was I going to get through the next day? I was doing my best. And it wasn't a great time. And I am learning to have a lot of compassion for that part of my life and that girl who was deeply struggling and really deeply wanted to feel loved and would do anything to feel loved. I allowed my ex-husband to tell me what my body should look like because, like I said, that's how I got approval and the love that I needed. I went into an eating disorder treatment facility at 22, and believe it or not, I actually came out of that experience with a worse eating disorder than what I had when I went into it. And it was horrible because I was able to learn all these like quote unquote new ways to have an eating disorder. And I bonded with a lot of the girls who taught me how to get really good at hiding it from people, which I thought I was already pretty good at hiding it from people because when I told my friends and family I was going into this treatment facility, a lot of them were like, you have an eating disorder? And I was like, well, it's like not the worst one in the world, but like it sucks. Like it's not great. My body image is horrible. I got really good at just hiding all of these things. But man, those girls, they taught me some stuff. And I want to preface this. I'm going to touch on weight. Just again, another trigger warning, but I'm speaking about my experience and it'll all make sense at the end, I promise. But anyways, I went into that pretty like average. And then I spent 3 months in that treatment facility and I gained a lot of weight coming out of that because I was finally forced to eat consistently for 3 months straight and eat more than like 1,000 calories or 2 calories if I even was eating. And I just gained. Like, numbers don't matter, but for the first time in my life, I was overweight. And the crazy part is that I had been gaining weight for like almost a year after the eating disorder facility. And I was like stuck in these like really toxic patterns of food and shame and just a lot of shame, honestly. But the crazy part, like I said, is I was so preoccupied with so many other things. Like I had started my denim company at the time. I had a fashion business. I had a denim company for like 4 years. So I was starting that. I was building the brand. I was going to trade shows and I was like doing all this crazy stuff at such a young age. And I had this really toxic relationship. And so because I was so preoccupied with all those things, I had gained so much weight I didn't even notice. And when I started gaining weight, the emotional abuse was getting really bad too. I don't share any of this for like sympathy. I don't share any of this for like poor me because I don't feel this way in my body anymore. And I am way more empowered in my body now, but I was called fat. I was shamed for my body type. My ex-husband used to send me Instagram videos of like Brazilian butt lifts and tell me that I needed all this different type of surgery. He used to take me to the gym and make me work out so hard to the point of like vomiting multiple times. And then he would get upset with me if I like quote unquote needed a break. And it wasn't done in a healthy way. He would send me like Instagram models and tell me that I needed to look more like them. And it was like even down to the stupidest thing where like I'd get my hair done and never, not once in the 9.5 years we were together, he ever complimented me on my hair, and he would tell me like, you need to be more blonde. You should go get a spray tan. You need to do your nails like every week. And like I said, like talking about this is actually like insane for me because I actually thought this was normal. Like my eating disorder started at 10 years old. At 10 years old, I was getting up, and it was in 5th grade. I would get up and run like 2 miles on the treadmill at 5 a.m. before I'd go have a full day at school, go play sports afterwards, come home, and I wouldn't eat. Like at this point, I thought all of this stuff was completely normal. So when people would call me out, and I remember I had one of my longtime friends, she was like, nobody likes him. Like he doesn't treat you very well. I would get defensive of him. Isn't that crazy? I would literally defend him and say, he does this because he cares about me. Like, what the heck? Like, why doesn't anybody see? I just couldn't see the truth at the time, honestly. So finally, in the end of that like year after the treatment facility, like gaining weight and all that, and just being so preoccupied with like survival mode where like time just in a snap like passed, I went to a friend's birthday party and we took a group photo, and I laugh partly because that's like my coping mechanism in this moment, trying to recall this memory. But I looked at the photo. I remember looking at me and my jaw literally dropped. And I looked at my body and I looked at myself and I thought, holy, who is that? Like, is that me? That's not what I look like. And it hit me in that moment how bad this was all getting. So I signed up with a personal trainer at 24 Hour Fitness, and she put me on this very strict diet. I was like protein, carbs, like veggies, like no refined sugar, no soda, no alcohol, like doing macros, workout routine, cardio, lifting weights, like the whole thing. And this workout routine went on for 8 months straight. I literally worked out 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week. I was doing yoga too. Like I was doing all the things, walking, hiking, just anything I could do to prove that I was lovable, good enough, that I wasn't this ugly, I hate this word, but fat person that was like totally worthless. And so I was like finally starting to feel empowered in my body that I could like maybe lose weight and like love myself for the first time. But the emotional abuse in my relationship continued the entire time. Well, the entire relationship. But my point is, regardless of the effort that I was making to get healthier, the toxicity didn't stop. And so one day I was feeling like really good about getting into a workout routine and telling my ex about it. And he turned around and he looked at me, and in the sassiest voice ever, I can literally see where he was standing in front of the sink in the bedroom. He was like, you actually think that this is working? Like, look at you. After 8 months of that entire experience of like trying to get healthy and lacking so much support, I only lost 10 pounds. Scientifically, the amount of energy I was putting into trying to lose weight and literally losing like 10 pounds, my trainer looked at me every month and she's like, you got to check your hormones. Like, what's going on? Hormones were not the greatest, but not horrible. So I was killing myself in the gym only to lose 10 pounds. And at that 8th month mark, and guys, I was like overweight, okay? Like I posted about this on my Instagram. Like I was, in my experience, I needed to lose weight to be healthy. It wasn't about being skinny or pretty. It was just to be healthy. So at that 8-month mark, my ex-husband actually decided he wanted to move to another city to be with my family and work in my family's business. So I was going to be living alone, and I didn't know when he was going to come back. And the first month that he was gone, I dropped more weight quickly than I ever had, obviously, in the past. And then every month he was gone, I kept losing weight. The weight was like flying off. And then I decided to move up there with him and start my life over. And then I struggled again, only this time it wasn't about losing weight because I had lost the weight that I wanted to lose. It was now that emotionally in my body, I held so much shame, even though I didn't look like that person I was trying to improve. Like in my head, I still looked like the girl who was overweight and struggling, but I wasn't on the outside. I was like actually healthy and like fit and beautiful. And I couldn't see that because I had been so brainwashed. So my point in sharing all of this really vulnerably with you is to highlight the parallels in the emotional abuse I was experiencing on a daily basis and my body's need to keep the weight on to protect me, for protection, to keep me safe. I wasn't safe in my environment and I needed a buffer between me and my ex-husband. I do still deeply struggle with insecurities around my body at times, how I look and could I be better and am I good enough? Because the words that were said and the way that I was treated have been deeply ingrained in my subconscious because, like I said, there was this twisted part of me that thought that was love because he actually cared about me. And it all seemed normal to me because of what I went through as a kid. So this is what happens when we experience any kind of abuse. Our body literally goes into a protective mode where we are constantly trying to put a buffer between ourselves and our abusers. It happened with my client when she experienced physical abuse as a child and she was told to not have any emotions and hold it all together. It happened to me as an adult with my ex-husband when I was trying to lose weight and I couldn't do it when he was around me 24/7. Like, this is the ultimate survival mode. When our nervous systems are regulated and in a parasympathetic mode, just like I spoke about earlier in the episode, the heartbeat slows, which increases our heart rate variability. So our heart is healthier and we're more in the flow rather than a very kind of rigid, chaotic energy. Our blood vessels dilate for a more ease of blood flow. Our pupil size decreases so that we're not in this hypervigilant alarm mode looking for a threat, because as soon as our pupils dilate, then we're having to kind of be on the lookout. You may have heard the term rest and digest. Being in the parasympathetic mode in a healthy environment that supports a healthy nervous system increases digestive juices and brings flow back to our energy centers and relaxes the muscles in the GI tract. So those are all of the physical benefits of being in a healthy environment. And what's really fascinating or interesting to me is that in family constellation therapy, we call the person who is carrying the weight of that abuse that they go through in their body the shock absorber. Isn't that interesting? They are the one who is receiving the shock or the projection of someone's pain, and they're taking it on and they're carrying that pain because of many reasons. Lack of boundaries could be one, and then absorbing that projection into their bodies. So when I say a lack of boundaries, I also want to note that's not a dig. As a child, you literally cannot understand the concept of boundaries. Our brains are not developed for that yet. We can't hold that kind of information or emotional maturity. So when you're so reliant on others for survival as a child, the idea of boundaries is actually threatening to your connection and survival. So if you're someone who struggles with feeling empowered to set boundaries, look at the fears that you have if you were to set one. Do you feel that connection will be taken away? Do you feel desperate for connection? Do you feel that you'll be alone? The opposite of boundaries is enmeshment and entanglement, meaning when things are too close. So what are you too close with in your family, like the abuse, that is causing you to view boundaries as a threat? No one ever deserves abuse. There is no possible excuse for abusing another person. There is none. We are responsible for our emotional regulation and the way that we respond and react to things in our environment and in our world. And if people resort to abuse to cope with the dysfunction and the chaos within them around their own experiences and emotions, that is their work to do, and it never reflects the worthiness of somebody else. Here's another fascinating thought about why our bodies will hold on to weight in abusive relationships or situations, and bear with me on this. There is a deeply subconscious fear that if people become skinny, it could equate to either weakness or it could mean that they would become quote unquote attractive. And because society puts so much emphasis on like beautiful, attractive people, especially with social media, the idea of being attractive means that they'll get attention, and that attention could lead to abuse. It's this really backwards relationship we have with being seen. And most likely in the mind of an abused person, it's not a could lead to attention or could lead to abuse, it's a will. Their bodies are literally programmed that if they are seen, they will be hurt. They don't want to be seen. So if they continue to hold on to the weight and look unattractive, it protects them from getting hurt again. It's literally a survival bodily response. This topic, I know I'm speaking so much about this topic, but it breaks my heart for people who struggle with this because, one, your beauty is not determined by your weight. Okay, first and foremost. But two, people are literally denying themselves health because they believe it will get them hurt. It's crazy. People don't want to feel good about themselves because one, they may have never felt good about themselves, and two, the threat of feeling good is scary compared to the comfort they feel in their pain, which is so hard. But I want to bring this back to ancestral trauma because in family constellation therapy, we're looking at the nuclear family first. So your nuclear family is like your mom, dad, possible siblings, right? And then we can usually tie this weight issue from the nuclear system into the family lineage ancestrally. And in many cases, we can carry a felt sense of abuse in our bodies from previous generations. So even if you know for a fact you never went through any abuse, but you still struggle with your weight, it could be worth looking into to see if you're carrying that pain from someone else in your lineage. And if you really want to deep dive into what the felt sense is, I just put out a podcast episode, number 39. It's a mini podcast episode that's like 10 minutes long on what the felt sense is. So go and check that out. So if struggling with weight is something that is generational in some aspect, it could be unhealed and unacknowledged abuse in the family system that is being held on to. And it's now creating a pattern in the body, in your nervous system. It's rewiring your body in a negative way. And it's now creating an epigenetic trait that will continue into multiple generations. So there is a deep connection between the unprocessed emotions and trauma and feelings in our bodies. When it goes unhealed and unacknowledged, it becomes then an epigenetic trait or a issue or a gene that gets turned on and off, and they can be positive or negative. And then that is how physically we carry the trauma into different generations. Now, I want to touch on in the case where weight and abuse aren't two in the same. And the other thing that I'll look for in a family constellation therapy session is a tragic, untimely death in the family system, or like an early death of someone tied to your intimate family. An early death is anyone that's died under 55. You know, in family constellation therapy, we want to see all of our ancestors live the fullness of their life, which means they're connected with their life force energy and there's no illness mentally or physically, emotionally, spiritually that is suppressing their ability to live a full, healthy life, because that's what we all deserve. That's what we're working towards, right? We're putting down the pain in order to be in our sovereignty and to feel in tune with who we are meant to be. You know, when we're carrying this pain, it affects us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So that's like something else that I'll look for. I haven't seen that too often. There's usually some kind of abuse involved. What's really great about family constellation therapy is that sometimes for some topics, like not knowing why you have so many weight issues and not really knowing if there's any abuse in the family, if you didn't experience any, we get to kind of move through a couple layers to see where the root cause is. And it can be a little tedious to do that because you might be like, well, like, what is this all for? Like, what are we getting to? But I promise you, the whole point of family constellation therapy is to get to the root cause of what's going on that's keeping you stuck and looking at how you're unconsciously carrying ancestral trauma, meaning you don't know how you're carrying it, but you are, and it comes out in your life in the form of blocks. The feeling that you get when you've put in the work and you finally get to the root cause of what's going on is the most liberating and magical feeling, because not only do you feel emotional reprieve, but energetically you finally get freedom from that trauma that's been kind of like choking you or suffocating you. And physically, you feel like an elephant is off of your shoulders. So sometimes certain sessions in family constellation therapy are more exploratory, meaning we're using the field and our sessions together to kind of discover and uncover information to see what's keeping you stuck in a certain pattern. And then when we see the clear path forward, like I do not hold back. I'm like, next session, you come in, we're working on this because we finally found out the freaking root cause of this, that root cause of the pattern. And it's like a freaking hallelujah moment because finally you get the clarity that you need. Like you get to see what's possible for you when you're not clinging onto this trauma and calling it yours. So why I say that's great, people will be like, what are you talking about? That doesn't really, the first part of that didn't sound too great, but it is great because family constellation therapy, it does have a clear pathway to freedom. There's a very clear game plan as to how to get to the root and how to heal it. If we can be a little bit flexible in how many sessions or how we move through the information is one thing, right? We have to keep room for that. But what I love about the modality is that there is a game plan, there is a pathway, there is a structure to it. And being a Virgo moon, I love strategy. I love a game plan. I love a clear pathway. I love structure. And so this means that we can actually gauge success as we continue on the healing path, because we're clearly working towards something. And I think that's the greatest thing ever, because the masculine part of me, right? Like I'm both masculine and feminine. There's like room for both in all of us. That masculine part of me loves to get shit done. Like I thrive in tasks, to-do lists, and I like bringing some of that into a session, because sessions are not cheap and they're long and they take time and emotional processing. And I really want to create a session and an experience for someone where they come to me 4 or 5 times for a specific topic. We get to the root cause and we give them the freedom, the liberation, and the healing that they're looking for. And then they start to finally realize, like, oh God, I didn't realize how I was holding on to that. So how do we move forward if all of this information resonates with you? If you're sitting here and you're like, God, I think I might be realizing that there's something bigger going on, or you're having a felt sense experience, like an internal response to the things that I'm sharing with tonight or today, because I guess it's not tonight for you guys. There are a few things that I suggest, because although family constellation therapy can do a lot ancestrally and for you, because we're obviously healing you from the ancestral ties and enmeshment, we're still in these bodies. And these bodies still hold trauma. And we not only need to move that energy spiritually, emotionally, and in our minds, but we need to also create healing and safety in our body so that we can feel more ease and letting go of the pain that you're holding on to and the protection that you're feeling in your body. And as I'm saying this to you guys, notice what's coming up in your bodies. Are you tense in this moment? Are you feeling a little nervous, anxious? Like, let's just tune in for a moment. How are you feeling in this very moment as all these things are being shared? I'm feeling pretty activated. It's probably because I'm just on a roll with this information and I love talking about family constellation therapy. If you find yourself matching that and it's not aligned for you, let's take a deep breath. Let's get back into the body and let's notice where we can just come back to our center. So the first thing to get into, aside from family constellation therapy, when we're talking on this specific topic, is getting into somatic therapy, because somatic therapy is going to address the body and the subconscious directly. It's going to address your nervous system and your response system. So people who experience emotional and physical abuse often really struggle with like sadness, guilt, shame in the body, tension, a felt sense of like protection. So somatic therapy can help you work through the thoughts and the emotions and address the kind of related issues in these areas in your life and create safety in your body. And studies show that somatic therapy may increase your resilience in social, physical, and psychological areas of life. In addition to improved symptoms of PTSD, depression, and anxiety, somatic therapy may improve an individual's overall sense of well-being, according to research. Totally just quoted that. So having a somatic therapist you love and trust to guide you through these emotions and experiences can be truly life-changing for your mind and your body. And the book that I recommend hundreds of times for this topic for good reason is The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It's an incredible book that talks about how the body holds on to the memory of trauma. And he highlights the traumatic stress and how it's at the root of neuroscience. So traumatic stress is associated with functional and chemical changes in the emotional part of the brain, the limbic brain, and the brainstem. The second thing I strongly recommend is EMDR. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a mental health technique that involves moving your eyes in a specific way while processing traumatic memories. The goal of EMDR is to actually help people heal from stressful life experiences that have caused trauma. I've done EMDR numerous times and I just started it again really recently for something I've been trying to heal for like my whole life, but it's really been bad the last 2 years. And no matter what I do, I cannot knock this like belief. So my therapist is like, all right, it's time for EMDR. And I'm like, whew, okay. Because EMDR can be confronting because you're going into specific memories and you're reprocessing them. But the lightness that you feel once you've reprocessed them, it really does give you a glimmer of true, like real hope that you don't have to live with the pain of that memory forever. You're not a prisoner to it. So EMDR addresses the actual memory in your mind, and the somatic therapy addresses the memory in your body. And that's not to say that there can't be any kind of like mild crossover between the two. I'm really truly not a somatic or EMDR expert, but from what I've experienced doing this work on my own and then speaking to professionals in both spaces, they both kind of address memory in different parts of the body. And like I said, family constellation therapy will definitely address some of this for sure. But my expertise as a facilitator in family constellation therapy is helping you see the unconscious patterns you've created in your life due to trauma. And it also helps you untangle yourself from the enmeshment you're in with your family, where you've called their trauma your trauma and you're just like carrying it on. And when you support the mind and the body along with it, I like to think that this is true full circle holistic healing. And it's incredible what it can do for your quality of life, honestly, because our trauma, it always catches up to us. It really does. I mean, when I left my relationship with my ex-husband, I thought, finally, I'm out of that thing. I'm just happy to be out. Like, I don't have to deal with that anymore. And I just kind of compartmentalized it, swept it under the rug. And I was like, I'm never going to deal with that. It was way too painful for me to deal with. I'm never going to go back to that. Because what started to happen after my divorce is I started to realize how bad things were. And I started to have anger around what was going on as I was processing why I wanted to get a divorce. And then I was like, oh, actually, holy shit, I'm really mad. But because I wasn't able to hold space in my body for the anger, because it literally felt like I was going to explode out of my body from disassociating for so long and making excuses, that when I finally got to the place to feel it, I didn't even have the space for it. So this is why I am such a huge supporter of a full circle holistic healing journey. You will never regret investing in yourself. Yes, these things cost money. What I think personally is that if I can invest now and make do with what I have and the resources that I have now, and I can address what's in front of me now, I'm going to save myself a lot of trouble in 20 years from now when life has caught up with me and I'm married with kids and I've got this and that. I mean, I've got time now. And you don't have to be young to have time. I mean, plenty of people in life have time. But for me personally, I don't really see the benefit in putting it off anymore because I understand what it did to me. I understand that when you sweep things under the rug, you pay for it in a way that kind of slaps you across the face. And your avoidance, or rather my avoidance in dealing with all of this stuff, those beliefs, they just lingered. And they don't belong in me anymore. I'm not that person. And we all deserve to feel liberation and freedom from the things that have weighed us down, literally and figuratively. And so I really, really hope that today's episode gave you the empowerment to be courageous, lean in, look at the shit you don't want to look at, and get the right support system to do it. Don't do it alone. I'm telling you now, don't do it alone. There are people out there who want to love you through this process. They want to support you. There are people out there who love you so deeply that if they knew even an inkling of what you were going through, they would be there for you in a heartbeat to support you. Sometimes it just takes opening up to the right people. So not opening up to just anybody about this stuff, but the right people who you feel safe with at the right time to ask for that support. And it'll be so worth it. I'll end today's podcast with a really profound quote from Bessel van der Kolk, who I've now quoted like 8 times, but he is like the king of trauma in the body. So well, him and Peter Levine. But this is a little piece of inspiration for those of you who are listening to this or watching and feeling hopeful that there's a way out for you. And it's a quote from the book, The Body Keeps Score. And it says, as long as you keep secrets and suppress information, you are fundamentally at war with yourself. The critical issue is allowing yourself to know what you know. That takes an enormous amount of courage. So when you step into a family constellation therapy session with me or any knowledgeable and skilled professional healer facilitator, know that you are being held in a space of non-judgment and love. Most of the time, people that come to me with this kind of stuff, what I feel as a facilitator is unwavering love and a desire to help you see what I see in you, which is that you're not your trauma. You're not. Things happened to you. God, I got to remind myself of this. Things happen to us. Just because they happen to us doesn't mean that it defines us. Our trauma is never part of our identity. Just like our pain is not our purpose. We are worth so much more than that. But leaning into this kind of information and allowing it to give you that aha moment, that allowance to know what you know, that is courageous. And you will never regret investing in yourself, ever. I promise. So with that, I'm going to wrap up today's episode with just sending you a big hug. You know, we're not in this experience alone. And if this episode really resonated with you and you feel that you want to share something about this and how it supported you or how it helped you, DM me on Instagram. My handle is at KAT_DAOU. I'll link it in the show notes below. I'll also link a couple of the books that I mentioned and also the PubMed article in case you want to read it. And as always, thank you so much for joining me on another week, on another podcast episode. I am really, truly here because of you. So if you're here, thank you. See you next time.